On December 2, 2001, the world's seventh largest company ceased to exist. Not slowly. Not quietly. Overnight. $74 billion in shareholder value vanished in under 12 months. 20,000 employees showed up to work and found their badges didn't work. Their paychecks stopped. Their retirement savings, gone. Not stolen by a stranger. Stolen by the men signing their paychecks. The men on the magazine covers. The men shaking hands with presidents. Here's what makes this insane. Enron had been investigated before. Journalists had asked hard questions. Analysts had flagged the numbers. The SEC had received tips. Nothing happened. For years, nothing happened. Because Enron wasn't run by criminals who looked like criminals. It was run by the most credentialed, celebrated executives in America. And that was exactly the point. Fortune magazine called them the most innovative company in the country. 6 years in a row. The stock hit $90 a share. Wall Street analysts told their clients to buy more. Meanwhile, the whole thing was a lie. Every single quarter. Every earnings report. Every press release. A carefully engineered fiction. Here's how a gas pipeline company convinced the entire world it was worth $70 billion. And here's how 3 men destroyed it, and walked away rich while doing it. But to understand the collapse, we need to go back to where it started. Back to Houston, Texas. 1985. Ken Lay grew up poor in rural Missouri. Son of a Baptist preacher. Worked his way through college. Got a PhD in economics. By the mid-1980s, he was running a mid-sized gas pipeline company in Houston. Boring business. Stable. Unglamorous. He wanted something bigger. In 1985, Lay merged 2 pipeline companies and created Enron. The original plan was simple: move natural gas from producers to customers. Charge a fee. Repeat. That's it. But deregulation was sweeping through the energy industry. And Ken Lay saw an opportunity nobody else had fully grasped yet. What if instead of just moving energy, Enron could trade it? Like stocks. Like commodities. Buy low, sell high, pocket the difference. It worked. For a while, it genuinely worked. Enron grew fast. Revenue climbed. The stock price rose. Wall Street took notice. Then, in 1990, Ken Lay hired the man who would change everything. Jeff Skilling. Skilling was a McKinsey consultant with a Harvard MBA and ice water in his veins. He was brilliant. Genuinely, frighteningly brilliant. And he had one idea that Ken Lay absolutely loved. Mark-to-market accounting. Here's what that means in plain English. Normally, a company books revenue when it actually receives money. You sign a contract, you deliver the product, you get paid, you record it. Simple. Mark-to-market accounting is different. Under mark-to-market, you book the projected lifetime value of a contract the moment you sign it. All of it. Today. Even if the money won't arrive for 10 years. Even if the project might fail. Even if your estimates are completely made up. Enron signs a 20-year energy contract worth $100 million. They book $100 million in revenue this quarter. Done. The SEC actually approved this method for Enron in 1992. That approval would haunt America for a decade. Because here's the problem. Next quarter, Enron needs to show growth again. So they need more contracts. Bigger contracts. With more optimistic projections. To keep booking more phantom revenue. It's a treadmill that only goes faster. And it never stops. But Skilling had a second move. If mark-to-market was the engine, Andy Fasto was the transmission. Andrew Fasto joined Enron in 1990. He was 29 years old. He had a gift for financial structures so complex that almost nobody could understand them. That wasn't a bug. That was the entire strategy. Fasto built what are called special purpose entities. SPEs. Off-the-books companies. Shell companies with names like LJM, Cayman and Raptor. On paper, they looked like independent businesses. In reality, Enron controlled them. Here's how they work. When Enron had a bad investment, something losing money, they transferred it to an SPE. The loss disappeared from Enron's books. The SPE absorbed it. Enron's quarterly report looked clean. Investors saw healthy numbers. The stock stayed high. And here's the part that should make your blood boil. Fasto was personally running some of these SPEs on the side. Enron was paying fees to shell companies that Fasto secretly controlled. He was charging his own employer. And pocketing the money. He made $45 million doing this. While sitting in Enron's executive suite. But none of this could have worked without one final ingredient. Their accountants. Arthur Andersen was one of the 5 most prestigious accounting firms on the planet. When they signed off on Enron's books, the world believed them. They had audited Enron for 16 years. They had one client that paid them over $50 million a year. That client was Enron. Arthur Andersen wasn't just auditing Enron. They had consultants inside Enron's offices. Every day. Here's a question that won't leave you alone. Did Arthur Andersen not understand what they were signing off on? Or did they understand it perfectly? By the late 1990s, the machine was running at full speed. Enron had expanded into broadband, water utilities, weather derivative. Yes, they were literally trading weather. Every new venture got booked at optimistic projection. Every bad investment vanished into an SPE. Every quarter looked better than the last. But a few people were asking uncomfortable questions. A credit analyst at Goldman Sachs flagged the SPE structures in 1998. His report was buried. An Enron vice president named Sharon Watkins would later write an anonymous letter. That letter sat on a desk for months. And then there was one journalist. One journalist who asked the simplest question in the world. We'll get to her. But first, let's talk about what $70 billion in fake money actually looks like. By 1999, Enron was untouchable. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. The stock was climbing toward $90 a share. The company was valued at $70 billion. To put that in perspective, that's larger than most countries' entire annual budget. And Houston knew it. Enron's headquarters was a gleaming 50-story glass tower downtown. Employees got free gourmet meals in the cafeteria. The executive floor had original artwork on the walls. Not prints. Originals. Ken Lay owned multiple homes. A penthouse in Houston. A vacation property in Aspen. An apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. He threw fundraisers for presidents. Both parties. George W. Bush called him Kenny Boy. Lay sat on the boards of major universities and charities. He gave speeches about the power of free markets. He genuinely believed, or convinced himself, that Enron was changing the world. Jeff Skilling was becoming a celebrity CEO. Business magazines ran profiles with headlines like, "The smartest man in the room." He told employees that Enron stock would hit $130. Then $140. He told analysts the same thing. On earnings calls, he used language that made investors feel almost embarrassed to ask follow-up questions. If you didn't understand Enron's business model, that was your problem. You simply weren't sophisticated enough. That attitude was a strategy. Deliberate complexity was the shield. Enron's annual report ran to hundreds of pages. The footnotes described the SPE structures in language so dense it was almost unreadable. Technically, the information was there. Buried. In footnotes. Written by lawyers specifically to obscure rather than explain. One analyst later said reading Enron's financials felt like receiving a transmission from another planet. You could tell something was being communicated. You just couldn't tell what. And while the executives performed confidence for Wall Street, the employees were living it for real. Enron had a brilliant internal system called Performance Review Committee. Employees called it rank and yank. Every year, the bottom 15% of performers were fired. This created a culture of absolute fear. Nobody questioned anything. Nobody raised their hand. Nobody asked why the broadband division was booking hundreds of millions in revenue from a network that barely existed. Because asking questions got you ranked at the bottom. And the bottom got you fired. Fasto's SPEs were multiplying. By 2000, there were hundreds of them. With names that felt almost mocking: Raptor, Raptor 2, Raptor 3, Raptor 4. The Raptors alone were hiding over $1 billion in losses. Losses that should have appeared on Enron's balance sheet. Losses that would have crashed the stock price instantly if anyone had seen them. But nobody saw them. Because Arthur Andersen kept signing off. And Wall Street analysts kept saying buy. 16 out of 17 analysts covering Enron rated it a strong buy in 2001. 16 out of 17. Even as the cracks were starting to show. Because something was happening behind the scenes that almost nobody knew about yet. Jeff Skilling had started selling his stock. Quietly. Over time. But enough to notice, if you were paying attention. Between 1999 and 2001, Skilling sold over $60 million worth of Enron shares. Ken Lay sold over $300 million. $300 million. While telling employees the stock was going to $130. While employees were putting their 401k contributions into Enron stock. The same stock their bosses were quietly dumping. There's a woman named Barbara Malone. She worked at Enron for years. She followed the advice she was given. She put her retirement savings into Enron stock. By the time it was over, her account was worth $1,200. She had planned to retire at 60. She was still working at 72. There were thousands of Barbaras. That part never makes the magazine profiles. But someone had noticed. Not the SEC. Not the analysts. Not Arthur Andersen. A journalist. A 30-year-old reporter at Fortune magazine named Bethany McLean. In early 2001, she was looking at Enron's financials and she kept arriving at the same problem. She could not figure out how Enron actually made money. Not in any concrete, explainable way. So she wrote a story. And she asked one question in the headline that would eventually bring down a $70 billion empire. Asterisk, is Enron overpriced? Asterisk. When the article published, Enron's PR team went to war. Skilling called McLean personally. He called her reporting unethical. Enron's CFO flew to New York to meet with Fortune's editors. To pressure them. To discredit her. The strategy was simple. Attack the journalist. Bury the question. Move on. It had worked before. It would not work this time. Because somewhere in Washington, an envelope had landed on a desk. Inside was a 6-page letter. Written by an Enron vice president named Sharon Watkins. It began, asterisk, I am incredibly nervous that we will implode in a wave of accounting scandals. Asterisk. She sent it to Ken Lay. Ken Lay handed it to Enron's lawyers. Enron's lawyers told Ken Lay the accounting was probably fine. The letter was filed away. The clock kept ticking. March 2001. Bethany McLean's article hit newsstands. Most of Wall Street dismissed it. Enron's stock dipped slightly. Then recovered. The machine kept running. But something had changed. The question was now public. And other journalists started pulling the same thread. Then the broader market started cracking. The dot-com bubble had already burst. Investors were nervous. Risk appetite was shrinking. And Enron's entire model depended on one thing above everything else. Confidence. The moment investors stopped believing in the projections became worthless. Mark-to-market accounting only works if nobody looks too hard at the math. People were starting to look. In August 2001, Jeff Skilling did something nobody expected. He resigned. Abruptly. After only 6 months as CEO. His official reason was personal. He wanted to spend more time with his family. That's what he said. On a conference call with analysts, one investor asked him directly. Is everything okay at Enron? Skilling said yes. Everything was fine. He then sold millions more in stock. Inside Enron, the mood shifted overnight. Employees sensed something was wrong. Nobody said it out loud. But people started quietly updating their resumes. Sharon Watkins, the vice president who had written that letter to Ken Lay, wasn't staying quiet anymore. She went to the SEC. Not through official channel. Anonymously. She submitted a tip describing the SPE structure. The SEC logged the tip. And did nothing with it. Not yet. But there was another problem developing inside Enron's own balance sheet. The Raptor SPEs were collapsing. Remember, the Raptors were designed to absorb Enron's bad investments. But the Raptors were themselves backed by Enron stock. When Enron's stock price started falling, the Raptors lost their collateral. They couldn't absorb losses anymore. They needed to be bailed out. By Enron. Using money Enron didn't actually have. It was a structure that only worked in one direction: up. The moment the stock started falling, the entire architecture began eating itself. Fasto knew this. He had known this for a long time. And he had kept building anyway. Because every quarter he delayed the collapse, he collected more fees. More personal profit. More millions funneled into the accounts he controlled. October 2001. Enron announced a $618 million quarterly loss. The first honest number they had reported in years. And buried in the footnotes, $1.2 billion in shareholder equity simply written off. Gone. With almost no explanation. Wall Street didn't understand what they were reading. But they understood the number. $618 million loss. The stock dropped 20% in a single day. The SEC opened a formal investigation. Now it wasn't a tip. Now it had subpoena. Enron hired a law firm to conduct an internal review. That law firm had a conflict of interest. They had previously done legal work for the SPEs. The review found nothing wrong. It would later be described as one of the most compromised investigations in corporate history. Then the Wall Street Journal published the story that finished it. Reporters had obtained internal documents showing Fasto's personal profits from the SPEs. $45 million. While serving as Enron's CFO. While those same SPEs were destroying the company he was supposed to be protecting. Enron's board fired Fasto within 24 hours. Ken Lay went on CNBC. He told investors the company was fundamentally sound. He told them the stock was a buying opportunity. He was still saying this as the building was burning down around him. Employees watched their CEO on television telling them everything was fine. And watched their 401k balances drop by thousands of dollars per hour. Because their retirement accounts were locked. Enron had frozen employee 401k accounts during a routine administrative transition. The timing was catastrophic. Employees could not sell their Enron stock. Executives could. Executives did. November 2001. Credit rating agencies downgraded Enron's debt to junk status. That was the kill shot. Enron's trading business required investment-grade credit to function. Without it, counterparties stopped trading with them. Revenue collapsed to zero almost instantly. Not gradually. Instantly. Enron tried to negotiate a merger with a smaller competitor, Dynegy. For 3 weeks, a lifeline seemed possible. Then Dynegy's accountants looked at the real books. The actual books. Not the ones Enron had shown the public. Dynegy walked away. December 2, 2001. Enron filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. $63 billion in assets. The largest bankruptcy filing in American history at that point. 20,000 employees lost their jobs that week. Most lost their health insurance too. The severance package for most workers was $4,500. $4,500. Ken Lay's bonus that year had been $10 million. The FBI moved fast. Within weeks, investigators were inside Enron's offices. But something was already happening at Arthur Andersen's offices across town. Document shredders were running. Around the clock. Employees later testified they had shredded entire truckloads of Enron-related documents. After the SEC investigation was public. After they knew subpoenas were coming. They shredded anyway. Fasto was arrested in October 2002. He walked into federal court in Houston in handcuffs. His wife Leah was arrested the same week. She had signed documents for the shell companies. She served a year in prison. Skilling was indicted in 2004. Ken Lay was indicted the same year. Both men sat in a Houston courtroom in 2006 and heard the same verdict. Guilty. On multiple counts. The walls that had taken years to build came down in a single morning. But here's the question nobody had fully answered yet. How did the smartest analysts on Wall Street miss all of this? How did the most sophisticated institutional investors in America keep buying? How did regulators with full legal authority to investigate just not investigate? That answer is more uncomfortable than the crime itself. Jeff Skilling received 24 years in federal prison. The judge called his crimes fundamentally villainous. He served 12 years before his sentence was reduced. He walked out of prison in 2019. He is currently working on a new energy venture. Andy Fasto received 10 years. He cooperated with prosecutors, testified against his bosses. His sentence was reduced to 6 years. He now travels the country giving lectures on corporate ethics. He charges speaking fees. Let that sit for a moment. Ken Lay was convicted on 6 counts of fraud and conspiracy. He never went to prison. 6 weeks after the verdict, before sentencing, he died of a heart attack. His conviction was vacated on a legal technicality. Technically, under American law, Ken Lay died an innocent man. Tell that to Barbara Malone. Arthur Andersen was indicted for obstruction of justice. The shredding had been catastrophic. Not just legally. Reputationally. Clients fled. All of them. Within months, one of the oldest and most prestigious accounting firms in the world simply ceased to exist. 85,000 people lost their jobs. Not executives. Accountants, administrators, clerks. People who had never heard of the Raptor SPEs. The Supreme Court later overturned Arthur Andersen's conviction on a technicality. But the firm was already gone. You cannot undestroy a reputation. The Enron collapse triggered the most significant overhaul of corporate law in 70 years. In 2002, Congress passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. SOX, as it's known. For the first time, CEOs and CFOs were required to personally certify the accuracy of their financial statements. With their signature. With criminal liability if they lied. Audit firms were prohibited from also selling consulting services to the same client. The conflict of interest that had compromised Arthur Andersen, made illegal. New oversight boards were created specifically to police public company audits. It was the most direct legislative response to a single corporate fraud in modern American history. And yet, 7 years after Enron, the 2008 financial crisis happened. Different instruments. Different names. Same structure. Complex financial products nobody fully understood. Ratings agencies certifying things they shouldn't have certified. Executives collecting bonuses while the floor collapsed beneath their employees. The specifics changed. The architecture didn't. So why does this keep happening? The honest answer is uncomfortable. These frauds don't succeed because the criminals are unusually clever. They succeed because of how human beings respond to confidence. To credentials. To complexity. When someone in an expensive suit uses language you don't quite understand, the easiest response is to assume they know something you don't. That assumption is exactly what fraudsters depend on. Enron's executives didn't hide their fraud in a basement. They published it. In footnotes. In plain sight. Betting that nobody would read that far. They were right. Until they weren't. The investors who lost money weren't stupid. They were trusting a system designed to be trustworthy. Auditors who were supposed to audit. Regulators who were supposed to regulate. Analysts who were supposed to analyze. Every single checkpoint failed simultaneously. Not because everyone was corrupt. Because everyone had an incentive to keep the music playing. Analysts got business from Enron. Andersen got fees from Enron. Banks got trading revenue from Enron. Stopping the music cost all of them money. So nobody stopped it. Until there was no music left. 20,000 people lost their jobs. Billions in retirement savings evaporated. Pension funds that had invested in Enron stock reported catastrophic losses. Teachers, nurses, civil servants, people who had never heard of mark-to-market accounting, lost portions of their retirement funds they would never recover. The total shareholder losses exceeded $74 billion. To this day, most victims recovered almost nothing. Enron's glass tower in Houston still stands. It was eventually bought by Chevron. The lobby looks the same. The elevators still work. The artwork is gone. And somewhere in there, on a floor that used to belong to the most celebrated energy company in America, someone is probably sitting at a desk, looking at a spreadsheet, trusting the numbers in front of them. The way everyone trusted Enron's numbers. The way everyone always trusts the numbers. Until one journalist asks one simple question. How exactly does this company make its money? And nobody can answer. That's how the smartest guys in the room stole $74 billion. And changed American corporate law forever.